It was Howard Carter's artistic ability that brought him to Egypt. He was born in London in 1874, the son of artist Samuel Carter, who is known for painting animal portraits, mainly dogs and horses, for rich local clients. Through his father, Carter met an Egyptologist named Percy Newberry, who in 1891 arranged for Carter, then only 17, to travel to Egypt to help record the extensive artwork being uncovered in tombs and temples around the country. Carter soon showed promise as an archaeologist in his own right, and in 1899 he was appointed Inspector of Monuments for Upper Egypt in the Egyptian Antiquities Service in Cairo. For the next several years, Carter would work at a number of different archaeological sites, but in the Valley of the Kings, he would discover something that would trigger a slew of mysterious deaths and change archaeology forever. The Valley of the Kings lies just across the Nile from Luxor and was part of the ancient city of Thebes. It was the burial site of almost all the pharaohs of the 18th, 19th and 20th dynasties, a period between the 16th and 11th century BC. Between 1902 and 1913, the license to excavate in the Valley of the Kings was held by wealthy businessman Theodore Davis. Howard Carter worked for Davis for 2 years, 1902 to 1904, and while supervising excavations in the valley, he discovered the tombs of Hatshepsut and Tutmosis IV. Davis would then employ his own independent archaeologists to continue work in the valley. Carter's work would take him elsewhere, but he longed to return to the Valley of the Kings. In 1914, Davis finally gave up the rights to dig in the valley, famously saying, "I fear the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted." Most other Egyptologists agreed with him, but by that time Carter had teamed up with a rich patron, the English aristocrat George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. With the excavation license up for grabs, Carter seized his chance and convinced Carnarvon to finance his dig. Carter carefully studied the scars left in the valley by previous excavators and was certain there were places that hadn't yet been searched, particularly in the central floor of the valley. He became convinced this area would yield the tomb of a little-known king named Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun was one of the few 18th dynasty pharaohs for whom neither a tomb nor a mummy had been found. In 1907, Davis's team would discover a tomb called KV-55, containing a coffin and mummy. It would be over 100 years later when DNA tests would confirm that mummy was either a brother to Tutankhamun or his father, Akhenaten. But there were several items among Davis's finds that bore Tutankhamun's name, fueling Carter's belief that the young king's tomb was nearby. Today, the Valley of the Kings is a tourist attraction, but in those days it looked like a huge quarry, full of dirt and stone left behind by previous excavators. Before he could investigate his chosen patch of ground, Carter had no choice but to clear tens of thousands of tons of this waste, then dig all the way down to the bedrock. Towards the end of that first season, in early 1918, the labourers uncovered the remains of a group of ancient workmen's huts, dating to the 19th dynasty, just after Tutankhamun's time. The huts were undisturbed. If there was an intact, undiscovered 18th dynasty tomb somewhere nearby, beneath those ancient huts was the perfect place to look. But for reasons that are unclear, Carter moved on. Archaeological dig season in Egypt lasts from autumn through to spring when the weather is cooler, and Carter went 5 long seasons without anything to show for it. By 1922, Carnarvon had serious doubts about continuing the work. He was tired of excavating with so little reward. Carter finally told him about the prime site beneath the workmen's huts and secured funding for one last season. Carter started excavations on November 1st, 1922, exactly where he had left off in 1918. He spent the next couple of days uncovering more huts, noting their details, then removing them to clear away the stony soil that lay between them and bedrock. On Saturday, November 4th, Carter arrived at the dig site at about 10 in the morning to find his usually rowdy team of workmen strangely quiet. At first, he feared there'd been an accident. Then one of his foremen told him that the workers had discovered a step, cut into bedrock under one of the first huts they'd cleared. "First steps of tomb found," Carter excitedly wrote across a page of his pocket diary. Ironically, the steps were just 2 meters away from where Theodore Davis had terminated his last dig and declared the valley exhausted. As the men dug further, a steep, sunken staircase began to emerge, and towards sunset on Sunday, they exposed the upper part of a door made from rough stones and covered with plaster. The seals on the door, showing the jackal god Anubis over 9 bound captives, the official seal of the royal necropolis, were intact, but there was no visible sign of exactly who was buried inside. Carter broke through the plaster and removed the stones from the upper right corner of the door. Then he shone in a flashlight. The passage was filled with stones and rubble, more evidence that the last people to enter had been the priests who sealed it, not thieves. It was a thrilling moment for an excavator, Carter wrote in his journal on November 5th, to suddenly find himself, after so many years of toilsome work, on the verge of what looked like a magnificent discovery, an untouched tomb. Carter knew he could proceed no further without his sponsor present. Reluctantly, he closed the hole he had made and the next morning cabled Carnarvon. "At last have made wonderful discovery in valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations." Carnarvon and his daughter arrived in Luxor on November 22nd. By November 24th, the workmen had cleared the steps leading down to the tomb and completely exposed the outer doorway. The door had seal impressions cast into it, showing a basket, scarab beetle, and the sun's disk, the cartouche of none other than Tutankhamun. The workmen pulled down the rough stones of the door and began to empty the corridor behind. By the afternoon of Sunday, November 26, after clearing a steep passage about 30 feet long, the workmen came to a second seal door. Again, Carter removed stones to make a hole in the top corner. He poked a testing iron rod into the darkness, then lit a candle to check that the air was safe to breathe. Reassured that the air wasn't poisonous, he widened the hole and looked in. Inside the tomb, blurred shapes came into focus. Objects lumbered into being. After thousands of years of silence, the tomb had visitors. Carter wrote in his journal, "It was some time before one could see. The hot air escaping caused the candle to flicker, but as soon as one's eyes became accustomed to the glimmer of light, the interior of the chamber gradually loomed before one, with its strange and wonderful medley of extraordinary and beautiful objects heaped upon one another. Widening the hole in the door, the others crowded together and shone a light into the darkness. What they saw still arguably stands as the most amazing archaeological discovery of all time. Looming out of the darkness of the chamber were 2 black statues of a king with golden staffs, kilts and sandals, gilded couches with the heads of strange beasts, ornamental caskets, dried flowers, strange black shrines, white chests, finely carved chairs, a golden throne, a heap of egg-shaped boxes, stools of all shapes and designs, and overturned chariot parts, glinting with gold. On November 29th, Carter held an official opening of the tomb's antechamber, attended by various Egyptian and foreign notables, and a reporter from the London Times. To raise money to pay for the complex process of excavation, preservation, and cataloguing the tomb's riches, Lord Carnarvon signed an exclusive deal with the Times, giving the paper sole rights to supply the world's press with news and photographs. And as the news and photos from the site went around the world, archaeology was changed forever. And Carter, who might have retired after his final season with Carnarvon, faced a challenge greater than any archaeologist before him: recording, retrieving, and conserving thousands of fragile artifacts while the whole world was watching. Tourists and journalists flocked to Luxor by the thousands. The city was so deluged by newspaper dispatches that 3 new telegraph lines were laid direct to Cairo, and a local hospital was turned into a telegraph office. Luxor's 2 biggest hotels set up tents in their gardens, asking guests to sleep on army cots. The work of clearing the tomb and preserving artifacts was slow work, but eventually the contents of the tomb would number more than 5,000 items. but the tomb's most valuable treasure was hidden deep within a room called the burial chamber. Accessing the Boy King sarcophagus was a major archaeological feat. The entire burial chamber room was filled with 4 nested shrines, huge wooden cabinets, one inside the other, protecting the sarcophagus. There was barely any room to work, and dismantling the shrines was a painstaking endeavor. Once the final wooden shrine was opened, the outer stone sarcophagus was revealed. Howard Carter finally came face to face with the king himself on February 12, 1924, more than a year after the tomb was first discovered. In front of an audience of VIPs and dignitaries, Carter lifted the cracked stone lid of Tutankhamun's outer sarcophagus to reveal the exquisitely detailed coffin within. Unfortunately, by then, Lord Carnarvon had been dead nearly a year, having suffered blood poisoning brought on by an infection after he cut a mosquito bite while shaving, and inspiring the legend of Tutankhamun's curse, but more on that later. Inside the outer sarcophagus was a glorious figure, 7 feet long and made of wood that was covered in gold. The observers didn't know it yet, but this was the outermost of 3 tightly fitting nesting coffins, each elaborately adorned, the inner one formed from solid gold. It would be more than a year before the complexity of the sarcophagus would be revealed. On October 28, 1925, they opened the innermost of 3 coffins to reveal one of the best-known works of art in the world, the death mask of Tutankhamun. Carter and his team were the first to lay eyes on it in approximately 3,250 years. Carter wrote in his journal, "The pins removed, the lid was raised, the penultimate scene was disclosed, a very neatly wrapped mummy of the young king with golden mask of sad but tranquil expression, symbolizing Osiris. The mask bears that god's attributes, but the likeness is that of Tutankhamun, placid and beautiful, with the same features as we find upon his statues and coffins. The mask has fallen slightly back, thus its gaze is straight up to the heavens." To this day, Tutankhamun's mummy is the only royal mummy to have been found entirely undisturbed. The news and photographs published by the Times would captivate the world and transformed a young Egyptian king whose reign was brief and little remembered into an icon of ancient mysteries. But that exclusive deal with the Times meant that other publications were starved for stories of their own, but not for long. In March 1923, an ominous warning circulated in the British press. "According to a rare book I possess," wrote Marie Corelli, a romantic novelist with supernatural leanings, "the most dire punishment follows any rash intruder into a sealed tomb." Corelli's tales of reincarnation, astral projection, and mysticism had been a favourite with Queen Victoria. She had sold more novels than her contemporaries H.G. Wells, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Rudyard Kipling put together. It didn't matter that the book she quoted was seen by scholars as a mundane collection of Egyptian fairy tales. When Corelli spoke, the public listened. She would go on to quote, "Death comes on wings to he who enters the tomb of a pharaoh." And when Lord Carnarvon died, less than 2 weeks later, from an infected mosquito bite, Marie Corelli was hailed as a clairvoyant, and the legend of the mummy's curse was born. And to add potency to the curse, it was reported that when Carnarvon died in Cairo, back in England, his dog let out a great howl and also died. Carnarvon would be the first, but there would be others. George J. Gould was a wealthy American financier and railroad executive who visited the tomb in 1923 and fell sick almost immediately afterwards. He never really recovered and died of pneumonia a few months later. A.C. Mace, a member of Carter's excavation team, was forced to leave Egypt in 1924 after 2 seasons with Carter. He grew ill, suffering with pleurisy, and died in April 1928 at the age of 53. In 1929, Richard Bethel, Lord Carnarvon's secretary and the second person to enter the tomb, was found in his room at an elite gentleman's club in London. He had been smothered to death, and his murder remains unsolved. The following year, Bethel's father, the 3rd Baron of Westbury, would die, aged 77, by jumping out of a 7th-floor bedroom window at his apartment in London. he left a note reading, "I really cannot stand any more horrors and hardly see what good I am going to do here, so I am making my exit." And to make matters worse, on the way to the cemetery, the horses pulling Respury's hearse bolted and trampled a small boy to death. Howard Carter himself would die at his London flat on March 22, 1939 from lymphoma. But again, many would claim the illness was a manifestation of the curse. So is the Pharaoh's curse real? The short answer is no. The newspaper media of the day, hungry for Tutankhamun news, jumped on any death that was even tangentially related to the opening of the tomb. The result is an error called survivorship bias, which occurs when researchers, or journalists in this case, focus on individuals, groups, or cases that have passed some sort of selection process while ignoring those who did not. Or in other words, they focused on those connected to the tomb who died, while ignoring those who did not. Journalists can be forgiven for not reporting on all the people that entered the tomb and went on to live long and healthy lives, but by ignoring the survivors, you form an incorrect conclusion. A study showed that of the 58 people who were present when the tomb and sarcophagus were opened, and therefore most likely to be targeted by the curse, only 8 died within 12 years. All the others were still alive, including Howard Carter, who died at the age of 64. The last survivors included Lady Evelyn Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's daughter, who was among the first people to enter the tomb, and who lived for a further 57 years and died in 1980. So the real story behind the curse of the pharaohs is the story of Lord Carnarvon's deal with the times, a story of competing publications desperate for headlines that would sell papers, and a period in our history when mysticism and a belief in the supernatural were common, accepted, and often reported as news. And while the curse might not be real, it doesn't take away from what is already one of history's most incredible discoveries.